All right, it's the top of the hour. I'll press record and turn the time over to you, John.
Okay. Well, tonight we are starting on slide 220. By the way, we're about halfway done because there's about, oh no, it says 474. So we're not quite halfway, but we're about halfway through the course now. So for what that's worth. We have been looking at the Jubilee calendar and how the dates of the flood were timed on several holy calendars, but especially the Jubilee, which had to do with watering, the watering season of the earth. And this is as far back in time as we've gone. We went back to get to Moses, and then we got to Abraham. Now we've done the flood. And now tonight, with if it works right, we'll get all the way back to Adam. So on this slide, we're back to the prophet Enoch. And he is born basically on the fall equinox. It's Friday night. It's really Saturday the 20th of September when you count it the Hebrew way. 3378 BC. He's born on the one day, one eagle, which is a big day for the main prophets. It'll turn out Adam's born on one eagle. On the sacred round, he's on one Lord on the Venus calendar. Tabernacles on and that's the day representing birth on the Hebrew calendar when you get your tabernacle. And I just said the fall equinox on the Enoch calendar, which is always on a Saturday. And great day, that's the last day of the year and one of the holiest on the Jubilee calendar, and one birth on Mars. So he's really on a lot of calendars, and he's on I think on both star calendars, he's on an important day. We're not there yet, but Enoch is a major figure in history. So let's go to slide 221. And Enoch is translated, taken to heaven without dying, this is the most regular Christians are not familiar with that word. And it's on Deluge Day, and he ties, his father is Jared, and everything about, well, we haven't got there. That's in the next couple of slides, but it's going to turn out that Jared is everything about baptism and Deluge Day, and that's a tie to his father. He's on zero Lord. We just saw he's born on one Lord on Venus, so he lives an exact number of Venus cycles. Oh, this is one correction that Joseph Smith, or the Lord, actually made to Genesis. In Genesis, all of the dates, the ages of the prophets are correct, except on Enoch, it says he lived 365 years. And that was corrected. It's also corrected in section 107 of the Doctrine and Covenants to say that Enoch actually, the city lived 365 years, but was founded when he was 65. And he actually lived 430 years. 430 years we saw was a Venus cycle. That was how long from the birth of Jacob to the Exodus of Egypt was 430 years to the very day. Well, Enoch lives that same length of time, 430 years. He's also translated on 13 Reed and on zero fullness on a couple of the uniform calendars. Now, well, it's also on zero resurrection Mars and burning on UE. So again, he's translated on multiple holy days. And now I bring in Noah, and the reason I don't have time to say it in this little slot, but Noah is born just 5 years after Enoch is translated. He's translated, if you look at the top, 2948. 5 years after that is October of 2943. That is when Noah is born. And he's also born on one Lord and one fullness. So I'm showing this at the bottom to show how it ties to Enoch. He's one Lord and the fullness on the same two calendars, and one resurrection on Mars and burning on East. So there's a tie there, a calendrical tie of just 5 years from between Enoch and Noah. Next slide, 222. Now, this is not a repeat of the flood. This slide has to do with Jared, whose name means the father of Enoch. This is not the Book of Mormon Jared. This is the father of Enoch, well before the flood. But JRD, that root means to descend. Like Jordan, Jordan is the lowest river in the world. And for baptism, and basically the name Jared means baptism. And the names of all the patriarchs before the flood represent something that's a key element of what their life represents. Jared represents baptism, and his vital dates all tie to the flood. He's born on one eagle. That's not flood, but that ties to his son Enoch. And one Sivan, but it's one prime. That is the day for baptism, rebirth on Venus, one birth on Mars, and one death on that. This doesn't show up, but the next slide will. Let's go to 223. Jared lived 962 years. That's, by the way, number 2. You know, everybody remembers the gold medal guy, the silver medal. Everybody remembers Methuselah as the oldest in the Bible. They may or may not remember he lived 969 years. This guy is only 7 years short of that, and nobody has any idea anything about him. Actually, Adam lived the longest, but part of that time was in the garden, and that's not counted as mortality. Anyway, he died exactly 235 years before the flood began. So he dies on Deluge Day. We went through the flood, and that was the day the rain started. And he dies on 0 prime. Now, we just saw he was born on 1 prime. So he lives an exact number of Venus cycles. And when you live 962 years, you can have a lot of cycles line up. He dies on 13 Jaguar. Well, he's born on 1 eagle. That completes the day after 1 Jaguar is 1 eagle. 13 Jaguar is 1 eagle. He lives an exact number of sacred rounds, an exact number of Venus cycles, and on the Festival of Lights, on the Uniform Hebrew. But to line up those cycles, you have to live around 900 years. It's amazing what Christ did in 33 years, because it's a lot easier if you live a long time. So here I've got graphs of when Jared's born and ordained and died, Noah's Ark, and the upper graph shows that it's all an exact number of Venus cycles between his birth, his ordination, death, Noah's Ark, and the baptism of Christ. A big one is I don't see it here. Oh, I've got it. The time from his ordination to the baptism of Christ is not only an exact number of Venus cycles, it's an exact number of Enoch years, uniform Enoch years, and it's totally tied together in a very rare thing, coincidence. So that indicates that and Noah's Ark loading is Noah's Ark Day. It's a week before Deluge Day. That ties, and this is 1483.000 Venus cycles. And so strong evidence to me that the flood was in fact the baptism of the earth, and that Jared, meaning baptism, foreshadowed both the flood and the baptism of Christ. The lower graph is relates to the same it tries to tie into the same graph above where the lines are, but it shows how Enoch's birth and death are tied to his father's. It's just on sacred rounds, an exact number of sacred rounds between their births. They're both born on one eagle. And then his translation day, Jared's death day, flood begins. They're all tied together with Venus cycles and sacred rounds. And the exact numbers are important. The bottom label says his life was 8 times 13 times 13 sacred rounds and 602 Venus cycles. I'm not sure the second number is important, but both 13 and 8 are key numbers. The life of Christ was 8 times 13 Mercury cycles, for example, 104. And so anyway, just lots of connections of baptisms and Enoch and Jared connections. Okay. Let's go to slide 224. Now we're going back from him back to Adam's grandson named Enos. Adam, Seth, Enos. Enos means mortal. And mortal, of course, means that you can die. Morte is death. And he's born on the day one skull, sacred round, and on the day representing second death on the Hebrew calendar. And the one prime baptism connects to his father. Oh no, that's going to connect to. Well, maybe that doesn't connect. This is Enos, so it's just a holy day. But his death day is really cool too. It's again on one skull, so he lives an exact number of sacred rounds. Tabernacles, which has to do with the mortal body. But on the star day, we haven't got there yet, but I just couldn't resist putting in a star. The star day is Stinger of the Scorpion on the star calendar, which is death on the star calendar. So, and it's a holy day too. Death can be a holy day. It's on all of the. It's a day and it's a cycle. It's a day in a cycle of life. So death is not a horrible thing. But nevertheless, Enos is death. Is his symbol. And that kind of shows what chair he's sitting in. He's got to be one of the 24 elders that was seen in the book of Revelation around the throne of God, because there are 24 seats and one of them has the name death on it. And because those 24 seats represent the cycle of life, 24 days. And we'll get to that in the star calendar. I don't know too many people who sit in that circle, but I bet you dimes against donuts that Enos is the man sitting in the death chair, because that's what he represents. Next slide, 225. Now we're finally back to Adam. And I don't talk about Adam's birth because some people believe he's born and some don't. And I don't want to get into that controversy, so I just call it the day he first breathed, the breath of life. And it's on a Saturday, 17th of October, 4070 BC. He lives about 70 years in the Garden of Eden before the mortality starts in 4001 BC. And he's born, now he is Mr. Birth on his birthday. Tabernacles on 2 calendars, and that's the day that represents birth. The day actually called one birth on 1, 2, 3, 4 calendars. So there's 6 calendars on which it's not only a holy day, but it's the day representing birth. Then 1 eagle on sacred round, 1 chief, which is the head of the priesthood. This is the head of the priesthood. That's symbolic. And the last day of tabernacles on the Enoch calendar, which also ties to tabernacles. So that's 7. Oh, and on the star calendar, it's the end of tabernacles. That was just discovered a couple of weeks ago. So in 8 calendars, he ties to tabernacles. Anyway, he's got the most, I've got at the bottom, this is the most amazing birth date in history. Without even counting the star stuff, I calculated the odds of there even existing one such day in 7,000 years of history. and such a day is not even expected. She'd have to usually go about 15 or 20,000 years to find even one day like this, let alone a day in the year where Joseph Smith taught that Adam lived nearly 1,000 years. He lived about 70 in the Garden of Eden. That's also a Hebrew tradition. So to have the one amazing day fall right in the year where he's supposed to have been first breathed is really strong evidence that it's correct. So there's no other day in which there are so many birthdays. Yeah, no other day in history. Next slide, 226. Now we got him started. I don't know Eve's creation/birth date because I don't have enough clues. I don't know how old she was compared to him. With him, I had the clue of the best birthday in history plus about 70 years. I haven't really looked hard for hers because I haven't had a reason to. But the day of the fall, there's a day on which she partakes of the fruit. There's a day on which Satan enters the garden, and I don't put that in this slideshow. It's only a week before, though, when he's allowed into the garden. And then there's a day on which she takes the fruit, and then a day on which she offers it to Adam, and then a day on which he eats it. And they're all a week apart. So the fall of Eve is on 13 Serpent. What a fine day, the high day of the serpent for her fall. See, they tell a story, and it's a decision day, number one, and it's what I call Raven Day on the Enoch calendar, and Raven has to do with Satan. It has other meanings too, which aren't bad, but that's one. And it's on the autumn equinox, on the uniform calendar, which can happen anytime in the year, and also tabernacles, which can be anytime, but tabernacles has to do with birth. So there's her date, a major date, the fall of Eve. And now slide 227, Eve offers the fruit. You can go to the next slide now. 227, Eve offers the forbidden fruit to Adam a week later, which is decision day 2. And it's the end of the grape harvest. There are those that say the grape is the forbidden fruit, and that was the tree of life. That's a Jewish tradition. And if that were true, what a better day to have, anyway, it's the end of the grape harvest and the end of tabernacles. And then the next slide, 228, is the fall of Adam. Now, this is really the big fall. This is the fall. She took the fruit first. Let's do the date, and then I'll tell you my reason for thinking that the fall of Adam's more important. That's a week later on one storm, and that's perfect, because one storm is when the storm comes and they're driven out of the garden soon. Not real soon. But anyway, one storm is kind of a stormy day. It's decision day 3. See, there's 3 weeks in a row with decision days. It's one adult. That's when you start going backwards. That's the day of retrograde motion, and that's on both Venus calendars. And it's one death on both Mercury calendars. And it's a burning day on the Jubilee calendar and Tabernacles. So it's a holy day on a bunch of calendars, plus it will be on the star calendar. It'll be the day of the seed of woman. Why is the fall of Adam more important? This is just my thinking. This is not revelation, and I've never read it anywhere, except in the Bible. In the Bible, God gives Adam a commandment not to eat the fruit. There's nothing in the Bible that says that God told Eve not to eat it. Adam is the one that tells Eve. So Eve broke Adam's law. But when Adam partook, he broke God's law. And when you look at the punishment given to each of these, the punishment given to Eve is that she will now be subject to her husband's law. This is not popular in this day of women's lib, but it may not have been popular back then either. But she would have to hearken to her husband and follow his law. And it's partly because she broke that law. And then Adam's punishment has to do with the thorns and the having the sweat of his brow and all of those things. Anyway, fall of Adam is a huge date. It's a bigger date than the other two were. Okay, let's go. We have time to do a couple more here. One anniversary of the fall of Adam is on the fall of Jerusalem. It's one death on Venus. It's also on one storm, and it's one death on Mercury. And those are the same as on the fall of Adam. So those become kind of fall days. But that's the day of the fall of Jerusalem. And that is given to the very day in the Bible. The 9th of Tammuz, there's the quote, there's the reference, Jeremiah 39:2. And it's in other places. Jeremiah 52, I think, also says it. But anyway, so there are these cycles that repeat, and they tell you a story in the calendar dates. Next slide, 230. This is the day of the beginning of mortality. This is the beginning of the Bible calendar. Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden on Sunday, the 9th of April, 4001 BC. And if you're an astronomer, that's called minus 4000. And we'll see. Well, we got one more slide. And it's on one deer, sacred round, one creation, one adult. It's on Passover. That's very meaningful because on two calendars, that's when you pass over from the garden into the celestial level wilderness world where they have to work and sweat. It's Passover has to do with dying and birth and crossing the river and entering a new level of creation. There's also Easter Sunday on the Enoch calendar, and on the uniform Enoch, it was the beginning of summer. On the uniform star, it'll also be the beginning of summer. That is called in my work the beginning of mortality. Adam's age is reckoned from that day when he became mortal after he'd lived in Eden for 68.5 years. Next slide is 231. And that one, the beginning of mortality, it was Passover 4001 BC. That is exactly to the day 4,000 Hebrew years before the birth of Christ on Passover in 1 BC. So from the mortality to the coming of Christ to the very day. You can't make this stuff up. This does not. In other words, these sacred calendars fit together in so many ways that they form a really strong testimony. We got one more slide and we're done with this part for today. Go to 232. Abel, I don't have his birth date, but you can kind of get his death date because he's replaced by Seth shortly afterward. And I looked through a few years, and his death date became clear. And not only that, his death date ties to Adam. And all the patriarchs, Jared, you saw Jared and Enoch tonight, several links on the calendar between them on being born on the same day on several calendars. That works for all of the prophets except between Adam and Seth, and that baffled me. Adam and Seth, there were no links. But when I discovered Abel, it's like, oh yeah, there's a link between one person, not all. The link is between Adam and Abel. They're both born on one eagle on the sacred round. And they're both born on one birth on Mars, the same as Adam. So there's two that line up. He also, I don't mean born, he dies, but his death date ties to Adam's birthday. And then it's also on Passover, and it's on one death, which is appropriate on the uniform Mercury. and one quickening on Venus. So it's on many holy days, but two of them tie directly to Adam, which is interesting. And it's interesting that it's his death date. And that's the usual case. Well, it can be either the death of the father and the birth of the son, or vice versa. But it's interesting how death dates, we think things are random, and we think Cain just randomly, they got him here with some kind of club or bone in his hand, killing his brother. Nothing seems to be random. These birth dates, that's another whole discussion, but these birth dates tie to, they seem to be known ahead. And let's not go through that. All right, that takes us up. Next week, we will start on the Mercury calendar. So we'll start on 233 next week. But we finally got back all the way to Adam and see ties from Adam to Christ. We saw a tie from Jared to Christ's baptism. I'd like to do that with each one of those prophets. I bet you, well, it doesn't matter. Those prophets' names all mean something, usually ordinances. Enoch is going to tie to something like endowment or transfiguration. And I've expected that to match up with Christ somewhere, and I don't think I've seen that yet. But anyway, the names are important as well as their birth dates. Okay, now to question and answers. Last week, the question was asked about the seven angels and identifying them. And let me make a couple more comments on that this week, and then we'll go. Anybody that's got questions, let's see, I can look at the chat box, and I don't see anything, so feel free to type a question in the chat box while I handle a little bit more on one from last week. I was asked about the seven angels, who they are, and I quickly went through a paper that I have that's called Seven Trumpets, and which identifies all seven of the key angels. And the paper explains why in more detail. And we talked about Enoch in a little more detail. And there's a couple things I didn't mention about Enoch. One is he's called the scribe in the book of Enoch and other places. And in Egypt, he's Thoth, who was the scribe. The scribe, Thoth, Hermes the Great, Hermes Trismegistus, this thrice great Hermes, all seem to refer to Enoch. And he's also over health. That's why he carries the little staff around, the caduceus, that doctors use. That's his symbol. His star picture is the Ophiuchus with a serpent wrapped around him, and that's like the caduceus. And his anyway, it's important that he's a scribe because we put him as an angel in the fourth position, and he was the secretary to both quorums. There's two different presidencies, one of patriarchal priesthood and one of Melchizedek priesthood, and he's the secretary or the scribe for both quorums. I didn't mention that last week. I did mention something about why he was the one to blow the trumpet for the sons of perdition, because he was over the angels up in the city of Enoch, and some of them fell and had children by women that they were supposed to be taking care of, and they went down to perdition. And Enoch is the man, he's over the highest and he's over the lowest. He's not only over the people up in heaven now, before the earth is celestialized, but he's over the people in the lowest perdition, which is below hell. So we talked about that. So a question was submitted this week on, gee, that sounds like the Greek myths, where these gods come down and have children that are half God and half men. And is there any chance that my opinion was asked on what I believe about the myths, the Greek myths, and that possibility? Well, I've already said I believe the Book of Enoch describes that and that it happened. So here's my answer. Now, I have not published this, but I'm willing to share with this class where you're seeking a little more and deeper knowledge. I don't even know this is true. If you quote me, I reserve the right to deny it, okay? But I'll suggest it in case somebody wants to do more research. The four angels, the seven angels, each one is over a 7,000-year period of the earth, and it's in order. Section 107 says, the same angels that just blew the trumpet for the resurrection are the same angels that each one is over a 1,000-year period, and they know everything about what goes on in that 1,000-year period, on both sides of the veil. And they are in the same order as the numbers 1 to 7 are. They give you all these clues. It's like they're trying to say, figure this out. We're giving you the clues. Okay, the fourth angel is over the 4,000 years. That's from 1000 BC to the time of Christ. Enoch is the fourth angel, Raphael. By the way, no angel can live in the period they're over. That's another clue. The clue is they know both sides of the veil. That means they can't be alive. So none of the seven angels live in their period. Adam's the angel over the last period, not the first 1,000 years when he lived. So Enoch is over the Greek period from 1000 BC to that. Enoch is a translated being. Which brings us to, who was the greatest author in history? Now, I'm in math and physics, and I had no idea in English, but I read somewhere that Homer, about 900 BC, a Greek, was the greatest author, and I would have guessed it was Shakespeare. So I thought, wow, I better read the Iliad and the Odyssey, or find out what makes people think he's so good. I read that, and he was so much better than Shakespeare. It's like, holy cow, this is the best author that ever lived. So who's Homer? It turns out the Greeks in 900 BC are practically illiterate. They didn't do anything in 900 BC. And by 600, you start to have some of them doing things. Homer comes out of nowhere, the greatest author of all time in an illiterate country, and in the age where translated Enoch shows up. So a long time ago, I came up with the idea that Homer is really Enoch, and that a lot of the floods, not the floods, a lot of the myths were written by Enoch. And they've been changed. You have it goes through Virgil, it goes through Rome. Everybody embroiders on other people's coattails. But these pictures in the stars, in my star work, Enoch is the one showing all the constellations. Enoch knows the pictures. Well, the pictures have stories. They have to have stories that go with them because they're related. This guy's killing that guy, and this guy's attacking this one. There had to be stories with the pictures. And here you come with Homer and mythology and pictures. And I'm suggesting that it's not beyond possibility to me that Enoch actually wrote some of the mythology and that great truths are hidden there. And yep, that's my answer to that question. I see another question rolling in. It says, are the sacred calendars compatible with Velikovsky's view as outlining the worlds in collision? That came out in like 1950. And it seems as if Velikovsky's view on the planets don't really match the steady regular orbit needed to produce these calendars. True. For the advice I give on Velikovsky, and I've read, he's got several books. Ages and Chaos was a 3-book series. Velikovsky is a genius kind of guy. He's a neurosurgeon, Jewish, didn't really believe in the miracle parts of the Bible, but he believed that the Bible and Genesis are describing something that happened. The advice I give there is the advice I gave to all my astronomy students on the first day of class when I taught astronomy, and that is separate the facts, which are observations. Observations are facts. They may not be true, but that's the best we have is observations. Separate that from the theories which explain them. So Velikovsky did research, and he found things like, Greek myths, that Venus was born Minerva out of the neck of Jupiter. So he says, aha, that can be symbolic of the Venus actually was shot out as expelled from Jupiter. And then he found some tables of places that talk about a year only being 360 days long ago, and the Venus sightings, and that Venus wasn't mentioned before a certain time. Anyway, you separate out the research he did. He found ancient manuscripts. He was the first one that I think found the Ippur manuscript that describes the Exodus from Egypt from the Egyptians' point of view, and the whole army disappears and all of that. The amazing research he did and what he found, separate that from his theories. I'm not in the camp that believes all the planets were jumping all around, and that the planets, he needed to somehow cause the manna at the time of the Exodus. So he has Mars, I believe it was, coming close and causing hydrocarbons to fall. Well, there's other ways to do it, and he does not explain why the manna fell every 7 days. Skipped falling every 7 days, and on the 6th day, twice as much fell, and it didn't spoil with worms when you kept it. There's a ton of the stuff he skips because he didn't have an explanation. So he's just doing broad brush things. So basically, I don't believe almost any of his astronomy, but he sure did a lot of good research. And I believe the year was not 360 days in the past, nor that the Venus has one of the most circular orbits. That does not suggest being ejected out of Jupiter. The ejected and captured planets are like the moons of Jupiter that they're not in a plane. Also, Venus is one of the most in the plane of the Earth's orbit. The pictures you see of the planets going around the sun, they really are in a flat plane that you can show on a picture. It's not, only Pluto is really, and Pluto is not a planet, it's a captured one. In my book, it's not never was a planet. And astronomers agree with that now. So, short answer is I don't believe Velikovsky's astronomy at all. It's a short answer on that one. Okay, I'm still looking at the chat. I don't see more questions. We have 5 more minutes. Does anybody else want to ask a question?
Hey, John, I do. In its regard to the whole patterns and all things, it's the TNC 39.4. And of course, God states, I'll give you a pattern in all things that you may not be deceived. One thing I've been going through the new scriptures in the Joseph Smith translation version, or what he added. And in Genesis, I find it interesting some of the things that Joseph added to the record. And one of them in the book of Genesis is Joseph wanted to mention where it's talking about the Tower of Babel. It mentioned direction, that many journeyed from the east. And as they journeyed from the east, they found a plain and so on and so forth. And I wonder why with this whole thing with patterns and direction, it would appear in the scriptures there's an east to west movement or a west to east movement, depending on if you're going away from God or coming to God. And then I think, of course, the sun coming up, it rises in the east and sets in the west. Is there anything with that, and especially, well, even the tabernacle in the wilderness, the openings faced in the east, and the progression and movement of the tabernacle was towards the west. And it was stated something that where the gods were in celestial space. So my question is, with the pattern, with astronomy, with calendars, is there something perspective that you can give on the direction as mentioned in scriptures and why Joseph would add directional movement?
Yeah, I was not aware of that change that he added. I can, and as to where they're journeying, sometimes they're going to journey west because that's where they're going. You know, they're going to the promised land and they're starting over, east of it. And so they're going to go west. I mean, part of it is maybe not symbolic, it's where they're going. But as far as things facing east, Indian teepees face directly east. When I set up my teepee, I measured it carefully east and I actually built a east-west line down on the floor. And a teepee is like a little temple. Anyway, temples face east, and it has to do mostly with rising sun and equinoxes and things like that, as far as the calendars are concerned. But as far as spiritual motion and east is the principal direction on, I'm told, I don't have my own knowledge on this, but on the old Hebrew maps, east is the direction that's up. Just like on our maps, it's understood that north is usually up. But east is the key direction. But I don't have more than that. I don't know more than equinox and rising sun and God and those kind of things. And also birth is over. That's where planets are born. And when they set in the west is when planets die. So there is a birth-death symbolism. Other than that, I can't think of anything, especially on why they would say why Joseph would add that. I have no idea.
And so I was just thinking, well, the next move, like with Cain when he fell, he went east. And so he sinned, he went to the land of Nod, which was one step further east. And so I just wondering, obviously he was going in a direction that wasn't ordained according to a pattern. And it seems like the
land of Nod, I believe, is a poor translation in the book of, and this is one of the points that the translator, his name was Samuel Carlson, I think, of the Lawrence. It's called the Lawrence version of the Book of Enoch, but it's really translated by a guy who wanted his name anonymous, Carlson, I think. Anyway, the translator states that one of the clues that the book is authentic is that it explains a ton of things that were questions in the Bible and with almost identical words that could have been misunderstood. And one of them was the land of Nod. And that's only one, I think, Hebrew dot vowel point different from the Jasher version. I'm trying to remember that, but anyway, it's not the land of Nod is all I remember right now. Again, on the directions, it's true. They've got to be important, because in the book of Genesis it says there's 4 rivers that encircle it, and there's 4 directions. And again, the Indians always have the 4 directions and a different color for each direction. And that's all through the sacred calendars too. There's 4 main directions, and they each have a color. 4 main angels, each associated with a color. 4 of the 7, which are the last 4, 5, 6, and 7. And they all have a direction. The 4 corners of the earth, the 4 directions and 4 colors. So the symbolism is everywhere. I don't know what it would mean to travel in those directions. I don't want to even guess, because the truth is usually not obvious.
Yeah, and I think about the temple moving
okay.
towards the west. Yeah, and then Bruce.
Yeah, oh yeah, and see, and temples are arranged where you go in a certain order, clockwise and counterclockwise, and you go directions and you go up and down. Anyway, all that can be important symbolically. It may or may not be the same symbolism across the board. I mean, something can have symbolism that's supposed to remind you of something. You know, like getting brighter and higher kingdoms. The light goes on or something. But again, anyway, that's deep stuff that I know. We are past time, so why don't we end it, and we'll continue on with the Mercury calendar next week.
Sounds good. Hey, thanks everyone for joining. We'll conclude.
Oh, I mean Mars calendar, I meant.
Yeah, let's see what it's.
Okay.
Yep, there it is.
Yeah,
all right.
It's Mars calendar. Okay, all right, bye-bye.
All right. See ya.